Hi, Kevin. Welcome.
Good afternoon now, I guess.
Welcome to the attendees. See, we have about 7 right now. Some people calling in. We're going to give it about 1 more minute, and then we will get going here today. All right. Well, we might have few more joining us today, but we're going to go ahead and get started. So welcome everybody to the 2021-2024 Transportation Improvement Program, also known as the TIP virtual public meeting today. I'm Kylie Jones, Associate Transportation Planner 2 at SRTC. I'll be moderating this meeting and keeping an eye on our question and answer box as we go through the meeting today. You'll notice our chat box is disabled, so we're asking folks to add their comments to the question and answer box. So this meeting will be recorded and posted to our website for you to review either later today or first thing in the morning. We'll have that up there for you. And we'll try to get to as many questions as possible during today's meeting. However, the public comment period will go through the end of the month. So there will be additional time for you to submit comments, and I'll give you a few ways you can do that shortly. So first, we will take a quick, so here's today's agenda at a glance. We anticipate the meeting lasting about 1 hour. I'll share a brief overview of the draft 2021-2024 TIP summary, and then we'll hear about specific projects of the program, starting with a presentation from the City of Spokane Valley engineer Adam Jackson about the Pines Road and BNSF grade separation project. And then we'll hear about WSDOT's Bridge Priority Program from WSDOT's Regional Program Manager, Mary Jensen. And lastly, we'll hear about the City of Spokane's Thor Freya Couplet project from Senior Engineer Kevin Piconso. So a couple different ways you can submit comments. You can submit them in the question and answer box. Today, you can find this email, contact.srtc@srtc.org. You can find that on our website, srtc.org. You can call in comments or questions, and we'll get back to you about those, and they'll also be documented in the draft tip. So we apologize for not having a face-to-face meeting, but you know, that's just the world we're in today. So this is the cover of the new tip. This tip was completed in coordination with WSDOT and Spokane Transit Authority. It's going to be available, well, it is actually available on our website right now under the Transportation Improvement Program tab. The tip includes all regionally significant or federally funded transportation projects or programs that are intended to be constructed or implemented within the next 4 to 6 year time frame. And so when we talk about regional, we're referring to the Spokane County jurisdictional boundary. And as SRTC, we update this tip every year for a 4-year segment because it's a federal requirement. And once this tip is approved by our SRTC Board of Directors and we receive public comment, it'll be submitted to the state to become part of the Washington State tip, which is also a requirement. So I will just summarize quickly what's in the tip this go around. So total, the draft tip consists of 69 regionally significant projects totaling $714 million of local transportation investments to be spent over the next 4 years. You can see in the 6-year time frame, it's 726 million in investments. So each of the projects are laid out in detail in the draft tip. So I encourage you, if you want to look at specific project details, to go to the document. For today, I'll just provide sort of a highlight on this next slide. This slide here, you can see this table summary. So we have it by project type, sort of a kind of a broad category. The number of projects totaling 69 and just over 714 million in program funds. So projects include bridge, bicycle pedestrian, planning, reconstruction. You can see the NSC has quite a lion's share of the program funds, which is great. Safety, transit, we've got TDM, which stands for travel demand management. So projects like commute trip reduction and walk bike bus. We also have the TSMO, which stands for transportation system management and operations. So things like signals, signal coordination, cameras. You don't sort of necessarily know when those projects happen, but you know when they aren't happening correctly. So we do have some consistency requirements for the TIP. As local jurisdictions submit projects to us, we review them against our congestion mitigation project, safe and complete streets policy, and then we also discuss the relationship to air quality and make sure that the program is fiscally constrained, meaning that we can show that there's enough revenue to cover the projects that are included in the TIP. So in this update, we've removed any projects that have started using their funding, which is the obligated projects, or removed phases. And then we added some WSDOT projects and a Spokane Valley project. So here is, I won't say all of them, but these are the list of different projects that have been added this year. So not totally different from the years prior, but again, just the update here. Another just recap. So the public comment period goes through the end of the month. You can listen to this recording today on our website if you want to come back to it, and perhaps email comments specifically for us if you don't want to use the chat function. But that is all, and I will open it up for questions. I'm going to give us a couple minutes, a couple 30 seconds, maybe a minute for questions. And Eve is going to help me keep an eye on questions as well.
I don't see any questions, Kylie, if you want to move on.
Yeah, well, thank you. That was a brief summary of the TIP. And I'm going to give the floor to Adam Jackson to hear about the Valley.
Thank you, Kylie, for the attendees today. My name is Adam Jackson. I am the Planning and Grants Engineer for the City of Spokane Valley. I work on coordinating the capital projects going forward for the city and securing funding and getting them planned and scheduled. So for this exercise today, going through what the City of Spokane Valley has included in the TIP, of the 69 projects, we've got 9 of those. And of the 714 million, Spokane Valley consists of about 30 million. So for the project I'm going to speak to today about the Pines Road BNSF Grade Separation Project, I've got up here on our screen the city's website. Lots of the information I'm going to share today is available on our website. So if you go SpokaneValley.org and you see our taskbar across the top with the various departments and your government services, etc. If we click on departments, a page of various links pops up, and right about in the middle is the Pines BNSF grade separation link. There is a wealth of information here. There's a few minutes worth of video that summarizes what we're going to talk about today. We won't do the video just based on the limitations of what always comes out to be of Zoom during a live presentation. So we're going to skip that today. But there's handful of information here that you could get into if you really want to learn more about the project. With that said, I'll open up the PowerPoint and let's see, nodding of heads. Are we seeing my presentation screen or my next slide screen? Next slides, okay, let me do a little switch here. See if this helps. Nope. Bear with me.
Right at the top, Adam, there's a display screens button, and you can just swap those.
Okay, I'm gonna try to get back to that. So, I think I want that one. Cover page, thumbs up, Eve. Thank you. So here's an aerial of the project site. Imagine flying over the site. We're sitting above Pines Road looking north, and Trent Avenue is running left to right. You can just make off in the top right corner the Spokane River, and just outside of the picture frame would be Plants Ferry Park. So we'll stroll through here. So as a regional project, the big impact here is the 62 trains every day that run through the greater Spokane region. At about 3.5 to 4 minutes of stop time for each train, that adds up to about 4 hours a day where users are stopped, effective arms down, gates down time. That's a big impact to the movement of freight and commerce through the region, and really hinders the prosperity of a user and of the community. The BNSF corridor, which is part of the Great Northern Corridor, that's shown here in the top right, the yellow line running from Chicago and Minneapolis over to the western Pacific Coast ports, that is growing actively. And what BN projects is by year 2040, they'll have over 100 trains running through our region. So that's quite the impact. And with what State Route 27, which is Pines Road, or State Route 290, which is Trent, as those continue to grow, the impact to users is going to continue to grow. And that obviously trickles down into the safety, reliability of the transportation network, and really has an impact on all our users, which shows up at the levels of commerce and quality of life. You can see in the bottom right an aerial of the general project area where you have the intersection, but you also have Mirabou Park, Centennial Trail Park, Plants Ferry Park, and the 2 state highways. Partners, this project, we've secured funding for the engineering phase and for the right-of-way phase. The funding partners are shown on the left side with SRTC and FHWA funding right-of-way, and the Federal Railroad Administration funding the engineering. In all of those scenarios, the City of Spokane Valley contributes considerable amounts of local funds to those funded phases as well. Supportive project partners on the right side of the screen are the various entities that have supported the project with letters of support and advocated for funding at various levels. Handful of years ago, 3 or 4 or 5 years ago actually, the city worked with a consultant to do an economic impact analysis of this project. And this takes a look at the limitations of where this area sits today and how it is limited in its growth because of this grade crossing. And what that means is to fix the grade crossing and also to fix the intersection, the signalized intersection of Pines and Trent, is almost cost prohibitive for developers to come in and contribute because the cost is too large. And so it's kind of just pushed away development. And as a loss, we've calculated here, if we do generate or do go out and construct this project, the revenues will show up in state and county tax revenues and new jobs and economic output. There are values at the local level, but as a regional project, this slide is intended to show the impact to the county and the state. So where's the project at? You know, in the SRTC tip, the actual phase of the project that's included is the right-of-way phase. And that's what's shown in the photograph here. And off on the right side of the screen, you can see the various stages of acquisition. we spent $500,000 in 2016 to buy a parcel towards the south end of the project. That was a parcel we knew we would need at the time, even though we hadn't had the design underway, but we knew the project would require that, so we bought it early before someone else could, and someone could come in and develop it. Other parcels shown, what we're doing right now actively this month even, in 2020, we're acquiring some parcels where the property owners were amicable to early acquisition. The project wasn't going to condemnation on their properties, and they were looking to move, and they were amenable to that. So we've worked with them to purchase those properties for the project. The future acquisition areas showing in the dark purple are BN properties, various Avista properties. They're kind of in the southeast quadrant of the roundabout area. And then also the local access street there showing at the north end of the photo, that's actually a private lane today. And those property owners are open to discussions with making that a public street. So that'll help the traffic movements in the neighborhood north of the site. Let's see, on the bottom of the screen, you can see the project schedule. So we've funded the engineering, which is underway. We've funded the right-of-way, which is underway. The goal would be to have a construction-ready project by the end of 2022, effectively starting calendar year 23 with the construction of the improvements. That's a hurdle because the construction phase is, of course, the most expensive phase. So we need over $19 million to construct this project. You can see the funding breakdown of what we have secured, almost $10 million there as well. So next steps, you can see the engineering and right-of-way are, of course, underway. They're in process. So we still need to work on those and develop those and finish them prior to construction. But based on this schedule, we do have that time. And based on funding cycles of state and federal funding programs, this project could lend itself to being a very fundable project as we work through engineering and right-of-way, because with funding cycles being as they are, when we identify a project today, there's obviously time until those dollars are cut loose. And so this is theoretically a construction-ready project come December of 22, January 2023. And that's the presentation from Spokane Valley. I'm going to kick the screen back to Kylie and
Thank you, Adam.
ask if there's any questions.
Yeah, thank you for sharing about that project. I'm not seeing any questions in the question and answer box. If you do have questions for Adam, you feel free to email us and we can make sure your question gets answered. So we will move on and we will hear from WSDOT's Mary Jensen about the Bridge Priority Program. So Mary.
Thank you, Kylie. Can you see my presentation?
Not quite yet. There we go. Looks like we're seeing something here. Perfect.
Okay, fantastic. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. As Kylie said, I'll be sharing the Bridge Preservation Priority Funding for WSDOT. So WSDOT does a lowest life cycle cost strategy when we look at our bridges and preserving them. And one of the things we do is we produce the Transportation Asset Management Plan, or the TAMP, which outlines our asset management practices within a very limited budget. And the TAMP includes pavements as well as bridges, and it covers a 10-year period. Within the TAMP, we have performance targets. And those performance targets for bridges are to design and preserve the resilient structures, minimize the number of load restricted bridges, and also minimize the number of bridges in poor condition. And so if you look over to the right-hand side, Exhibit 320 shows on the National Highway System, WSDOT has 121 bridges that are in poor condition, and statewide we have 321. And then if you look down at the lower left-hand corner, you'll see Exhibit 321, which shows the total of load restricted and load posted bridges in fiscal year 2018 is 120. And for Spokane, Trent Bridge actually belongs on both of these lists. It was in poor condition as well as load restricted. So that's one in the immediate area that you can go to see that it was on these two lists. So the funding levels for preservation needs are very low, critically low for the next 10 years. And our approach is to extend the life of the entire system as much as possible. However, we do recognize there will be widespread failures at these critically low investment levels. So what we need to do is identify priority routes, and that'll be the focus of our limited preservation funds. As you can see from the bottom graphics, the 2-year and 10-year funding deficits. For the 2-year in bridge, it's 1.1 billion, and over the next 10 years, it's almost 2.3 billion as a max. So why is there a preservation funding deficit? Well, unfortunately, when we did our revenue projections, which looks at all the sources of WSDOT revenue when it comes in, it was way too optimistic for actually what did come in from sources such as the gas tax. So that just never materialized. We are about $10 billion short from that optimistic revenue projection. And also the passage of Initiative 976. So in 2016, they passed a law to raise the car tabs to above $30. And then in 2019, we actually passed another law to lower it. So Initiative 976 actually lowered the car tabs. And so between 2016 and 2019, that revenue actually budgeted other projects. We no longer have that future revenue. And then COVID-19, that caused approximately about $1 billion to $1.2 billion in reduced gas tax revenue because everybody's staying home. And so with all of those things, we're about $15 billion under where we should be for funding our various modes of transportation WSDOT. So if you look at the graph at the bottom, you can see the green boxes are what we're planned to spend every biennium. And then the pink boxes are actually the balance, and it's a cumulative balance. So for example, in 2019-21, we plan to spend $5.4 billion, and we'll have about $500 million left over. Unfortunately, when you look at 21-23, if we spend our planned spending of $7.2 billion, we'll have a deficit of $1.9 billion. So we're not able to spend year over year what we want to spend. And so it's just accumulating to a $15.5 billion deficit due to the optimistic revenue projections, the lower car tabs, and COVID-19. So we have a shift in priority bridge preservation. So before we realized we had this lack of funding due to our optimistic revenue projection, we actually classified each bridge preservation project on the condition of the bridge. So you can see the lower right-hand picture is a deteriorated bridge. But due to the extreme lack of funding, our priority list was changed in 2019 to focus on bridges located only on I-90 and T1 freight routes. Now, T1 freight routes carry more than 10 million tons of goods a year. So what are the consequences of the shift in priority from actually the condition of the bridge to only focusing on bridges along I-90 and on those T1 freight routes? Well, this bridge is a bridge in Spangle. It's down on 195. And as you can see, this bridge is actually in poor condition. And we were going to close it down, at least one lane. And a detour to get around this bridge would take many, many miles. And so we realized one of the consequences of those bridge closures and routes taken out of service is we're going to have these long detour routes. And those detour routes will adversely affect the flow of freight and people. We also understand there's going to be economic and societal impacts associated with the closures. And these could be as hundreds of millions of dollars per year. And finally, the cost to reopen these closed bridges will be 3 to 5 times the amount that we could spend today if we preserve them today. So what does that mean for WSDOT? We had a list, and basically, I'm sorry for the busy slide, But all these lines, all these rows are projects, and they're bridges that we needed to repair. And as you can see, most of the bottom bridges were bridges that we needed to repair due to the condition of the bridge. And they have all been unprogrammed because they are not on I-90 and they are not a T1 freight route. So only the top couple of bridges are actually being programmed and actually being repaired. All the rest are falling off the 10-year plan and will not be addressed in the next 10 years. The yellow arrows are the 4 bridges that are in the SRTC tip. And as you can see from the 4 arrows, a few have been advanced, some are no change, and some are programmed. So what that means, a no change means we had already programmed those bridges, they were in poor condition, and we had actually kept the add date the same from the new rules of the I-90 bridges and the T1 freight routes compared to the old rules. Advanced means those bridges were in better shape, and we had them way far away, but because they were on I-90, they were advanced. And then program actually means that these bridges were not programmed in the 10-year program, and they actually were added. So I'm going to go over the 4 that are in the tip. So we have I-90, this is the 3rd Avenue Crossing Bridge, deck repair. And this bridge was not in the 10-year plan, but because it was on I-90, they put it on the plan and we will be doing it. It is in medium condition. I wouldn't consider it poor, but this will be one of the bridges we're working on because it's on the I-90 corridor. Lindekey Street crossing, we're going to do a bridge repair on that. It's over I-90. Lindekey is in poor shape, and we actually had it in our 10-year program, and it wasn't changed. The add date's the same before the new changes, so we're actually going to do that, and it is in poor condition, needs to be repaired. Mullen Bridge is also going to be repaired. It was in our 10-year plan. It is in poor condition, and so it hasn't changed at all. The add date's the same as it was before they made the new rules, and we will be repairing that. And Rosamond, Sherman, Arthur crossings, these 3 bridges are in poor condition. They were scheduled to be repaired with an add date of 2028. However, they were advanced because they're over I-90, and they're scheduled to be repaired in 2022. So finally, I'd like to talk a little bit about rural community equity and what focusing on I-90 and the T1 freight corridors does for our rural community. So from this map, it's hard to see, but basically the blue is I-90 or those T1 freight routes. And everything else in orange is T2, T3, or T4, which we are not focusing on. The black dots are bridges. And so as you can see in Eastern Washington, the eastern half of the state, which makes up Eastern region, there's a lot of bridges that are not on the I-90 or T1 corridors that will not be addressed in the 10-year plan. And so I'd like to talk a little bit about what that means for our communities in Eastern region. So the northern counties in the Eastern region are some of the poorest counties in the state. They have tribal land and low economic output due to the decline of the resource-based jobs they used to enjoy. And now our southern and western counties are home to the wheat industry of the Palouse region, and that relies heavily on the state system for transportation. So as you can see, when in the northern counties, if those bridges fail, it's really going to impact those poor communities. And we really need to think about ways that we can help those communities and try and get these bridges repaired in maybe making them more of a priority. Now, as far as the Pullman and Palouse and the wheat industry, the wheat supply chain from farm to market, it relies on the state highways in short bursts to get their wheat, their goods, to the barge terminals on the Snake River. So it's very short distances. And although they haul a ton of millions and millions of tonnage for wheat, it's the very short routes. And because of those short routes, it's not going to become a T1 corridor because they're all over the place. They're using different state routes. And so we're also talking to headquarters about that, the fact that we really need, wheat is the third largest commodity in the state of Washington. And so we really need to help this industry. And without those bridges, it could definitely impact the wheat and their ability to get it to those barges. So that's another thing. We're definitely working with headquarters on those two things. And we know that the equity is not fair, and we're working very hard to do something about that. So to be continued, because of the budget and the lack of funds, it's really hit us hard. And unfortunately, the rural communities are gonna be hit the hardest by that. And that's my presentation. Does anybody have any questions?
Mary, we do have one question. The question is, you mentioned a lack of funding partially due to Initiative 976. My understanding is I-976 is still making its way through court. Do you know the current status?
You know, I read the current status of it, and it's still in the court system. There has been no verdict one way or another, and all we can do is assume one way or another they're either going to honor the people's wishes or not, and we have no control over that. And I have not seen an outcome or a verdict as of yesterday when I looked online. So it's still in the courts, and if that comes through, I believe it's impacting WSDOT about $4 billion over the 10-year. So that would be a $4 billion swing, not enough to cover the $15 billion we're underfunded, but it would be a lot.
Thank you. Anyone else have any questions? All right. Thank you, Mary. And we're going to turn over to Kevin Picanso, excuse me, from the city of Spokane.
Okay, I'll bring my screen up here. So you should be seeing that now. And Kylie, is my screen showing up?
Looks good, yes, thank you.
Okay, great, thanks. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Kevin Picanso from the city of Spokane, and the project from the city that I'll be highlighting today is our Thor Freya couplet project from Hartson to Sprague. So this graphic, again, just highlights those limits of work starting at the south at Hartson Avenue. Project includes the Thor and Freya couplet area, continuing north to Sprague, and just north of the Sprague Avenue intersection to the railroad tracks that exist there today. We are highlighting here that there will be some isolated locations where our work won't be included or done. So for instance, at the Second Avenue and Thor intersection, there's some future and upcoming utility relocation work related to the NSC freeway. So that work will occur in the future. So we don't want to have our concrete improvements that we'll be planning through here to be torn up by that future utility work. So first, some background information on the overall corridor. This corridor sees as much as 40,000 trips a day in certain segments combined between the Thor and Freya legs of the couplet. This is our highest volume corridor, serving both the South Hill as well as Northeast Spokane. And the northern portion of this project segment north of I-90 is designated as a T1 freight route, which is that highest freight designation. In terms of pavement condition, the pavement condition was rated, it varied by segment, but as low as a rating of 34 in certain areas of the roadway. And that was prior to the 2017 overlay that was done. Now that overlay was really a stopgap measure. With our winter of 2017, we saw a lot of degradation across our roadway system, and there was a need just to do some stopgap work to make that a drivable surface. But we're not anticipating that will really hold up for a significant period of time, which is why we're doing this project. So our primary objective here is really to improve and upgrade the pavement condition through this heavily traveled and critical freight corridor, to improve that structural section that really just isn't adequate. What exists out there today really isn't adequate to handle the traffic loading, and especially the heavy vehicle volumes that exist. So our strategy through this stretch is to use a Portland cement concrete pavement. That's a longer life pavement as opposed to the typical asphalt pavement. Of course, it's a little more costly, but it should last much longer. And those of you who've traveled the corridor know that today, north of the railroad tracks, north of Sprague Avenue, Freya Avenue and then Green Street are already paved with a concrete pavement section. So this work will tie right into that, and we'll have a longer length of that PCC pavement. Some secondary project objectives. These are all kind of incidental or ancillary to our main purpose for doing this project. But as we do with most of our projects, we have to upgrade ADA curb ramps where they aren't compliant with current standards. There's some isolated areas where we will repair curb and sidewalk. We'll look for opportunities to separate stormwater. We have a couple blocks we've already identified on Freya Street where we can separate existing stormwater system that today goes into our combined sewer system. So we will do that wherever we can. We have some minor improvements to traffic signals. The signal systems that you see today will mostly remain as is. There'll be some minor upgrades and modifications to them. We're still considering whether we're going to add some additional roadway lighting in between intersections. There's of course roadway lighting at intersections today. We may increase the amount of lighting within the corridor. That's still to be determined. And then there's some isolated locations where we'll look to install a little bit of landscaping, both as beautification and potentially within our stormwater treatment areas as well. And then we'll upgrade some older utilities that are within our project limits. So just a couple quick snapshots. These are photos from prior to that 2017 overlay, but it illustrates a lot of the patches and pavement repairs that were having to be done just to eliminate the potholes, as a stopgap measures. A lot of cracking, a lot of pavement failures throughout the corridor. This particular picture is on Freya looking north from Hartson. And then again on Thor, you saw similar conditions through there as well. The details on this might be a little hard to read, but basically just conveying that there's different curb to curb and right of way sections through our project limits. Those widths vary on Freya and Thor and Hartson. And we're also depicting that as of now, in terms of our pavement structural section, looking at a Portland cement concrete section, probably roughly around 10 inches deep, and rebuilding the base as well. So I just wanted to use this slide to kind of highlight some of these areas where we might be able to do a little bit of beautification. This is very much sort of cartoonish or kind of concept level, but just up in the vicinity of Sprague and Freya where the couplet comes together, there's some medians that will have to be reconstructed as part of this work. We'll look for opportunities to add maybe some landscaping in those. And then down to the far south of our project limits, this is at Hartson and Thor. Again, there's existing concrete median island there. We may look to install some landscaping in that island. And then similarly over on Hartson and Freya, also that concrete island there will have to be reconstructed, and we'll look for opportunities for landscaping there as well. Just quickly highlighting the utility side of things, we have a lot of older utilities, particularly south of I-90. Because this is a concrete pavement section that we're planning, a longer life pavement, we don't want to be out there in 5 or even 10 years tearing up that concrete pavement to replace or repair some older utilities. So this graphic just kind of highlights that. We have a couple older water lines that'll be replaced, primarily in Thor. Along Hartson, we have an existing large 60-inch sewer interceptor that we will install a lining in that'll extend the useful life of that. And then there'll be some isolated replacements and repair to other utilities within the corridor. In terms of project costs, we're just at the early design stages still of the project, but early preliminary costs are showing around $11 to $12 million in total project costs. As of now, our funding sources are SRTC awarded the city a federal aid grant of $8.3 million in the last couple of years. We have $1 million, $1.5 million set aside from our arterial street levy dollars to help with the funding for this project. And then the utility improvements, of course, will be funded by the utilities, and those costs are estimated at a little over $2 million as of now. And then in terms of schedule and project status, design got underway earlier this year on this project. The NEPA document has been prepared and approved. We've recently moved forward with our right-of-way acquisition phase. We don't have a significant amount of right-of-way to acquire. These are mainly real small sliver takes at intersection corners where we have to modify ADA ramps, and the footprint of those ramps are a little bit larger than what's maybe out there today. So a little bit of property acquisitions acquired at several locations, and that work is underway. We foresee the design continuing through 2020 into early 2021. And then in terms of the actual construction schedule and going out to bid, as of now, we're anticipating going out to bid probably late 2021, start construction as soon as the weather permits in early 2022. As they're showing option 2 there, there's a slight possibility if our right-of-way acquisition goes well and goes maybe faster than expected, and the design progresses well, there's a slight chance we may consider going out to bid a little bit earlier, more like spring of 2021, get started with the construction in the kind of summer of 2021, and then have that project bridge over into 2022 for completion. This is very substantial work, given the limits of work, given the type of work of the full depth concrete pavement reconstruction. So we do anticipate this will take the better part of an entire construction season to accomplish this work. So with that, I'd just like to open it up for any questions you may have.
Thank you, Kevin. I don't see any questions quite yet. Maybe we'll give it just a minute. I do have a question though for you. The type of concrete pavement, as you described it, how is that different from what is out there currently? Like as far in terms of where?
So, yeah, well, today, and what is more common on our streets is paving with asphalt concrete, and that's what's out there today. You have an aggregate base, and then you have asphalt on top. The example of the concrete is what exists on Freya, north of Sprague Avenue. Once you cross the railroad tracks, that's all a Portland cement concrete pavement section, which is what we would do on this project as well. So that's Freya north, all the way to the river where it turns into Green Street in front of SCC. That's all paved with PCC concrete today. So we would follow that same approach.
Great, thank you. It looks like we have a question. During construction, will Thor and Freya be constructed during alternate years in order to keep traffic partially open?
The traffic control strategy, there's still a ways to go before we get to that point of making that decision. They're still in the early design phases or stages of their work. That's certainly under consideration. It's possible that we could break the bid into 2 different packages or contracts to get the work to go faster. There's even some consideration or someone suggested considering, I should say, converting back to 2-way operation temporarily during construction. So for instance, Thor would go back to 2-way and you'd close Freya down in order to expedite construction on Freya, and then you'd flop the work. So all those strategies, both in terms of the contracting strategy of 1 versus 2 contracts and that traffic control, that's still to be determined. And that partly is related to and plays into those different schedule scenarios that I mentioned.
Great, thank you. Well, that concludes our presentation and our virtual meeting today. I'm going to share my screen again just so folks can see the contact information. So let me pull that up really quickly. And okay, so I will leave this up here for a few minutes just so folks can just know how they can reach us. If there are specific questions for our panelists, please go ahead and direct those to us and we can get those out to them so they may be answered. But thanks for tuning in today. Looks like we have, yeah, just a big thanks to everyone who joined, and Kevin and Adam and Mary, thank you guys. Feel free to log off or stay on. Any
Thank you, Kylie.
remarks? Okay. Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye, guys.
Thanks, everybody.
Julie, are you still recording?
Nicely done.
I am going to stop the recording and close the meeting, all right?
Okay. Thank
Okay,
you.
thank you.
Thanks,
Bye.
everyone.